Darling one, you were born from the sweetest love, cast from the fires of creation, burning bright into the making of your perfect constellations. Head high, my love, never let them diminish you. Stand tall in the power of your love. Break open to the thousands come before you, written in your heart with holy blood. Keep going, my love. Hold tight to the scripture of your inheritance, your dreams born from ancient stone. Weave your magic star of wisdom, breathing life into hollow bones. Courage, my love. Place pain upon your sacred altars. Grow seeds where life has become hopeless. Lend hands to those who fall and falter. Let love be life's greatest opus. Welcome, beautiful souls. My name is Tara Brading, and I'm the creator of the Dreaming the Ancestors podcast series, where we talk about remembering and reclaiming ancestral stories, feminine wisdom, and earth magic. This is the 15th episode, and today I'm very excited to welcome Niall Graham to the podcast. Niall is a men's work mentor facilitator based in Ireland, and he specializes in working with shadow, initiation, and sexuality. He's also interested in cultural and collective wounds between men and women, and the masculine and feminine as both a path to internal integration and cultural healing. I'm so honored to be here with you, Niall. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. Feel free to say a quick hello to everyone.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to dive into this chat with you.
Thank you, Niall. And as always, I like to begin these conversations by opening up our circle, our space, and really coming into our hearts. And I invite us all to imagine that we're having this conversation in the flesh, heart to heart, and we're sitting on the ground around a great fire. And those of you listening, I invite you to imagine this in your heart, in your mind, to really feel this presence as you come to the fire, this ancestral fire that holds so much wisdom. Since the beginning of time, our ancestors gathered around the fire to share stories, to share wisdom with each other. And so as we come together around this sacred fire, may we remember the power of coming together. And I'd like to take a moment to welcome in our ancestors as well. I'd really like to honor and welcome in the wise grandfathers of my lineage and the wise grandfathers of all of you who are listening, also honoring Niall's wise grandfathers, as we are really going to be talking about the sacred masculine in this episode. And so I lovingly welcome in these elders of the lineage, these spirits who are deeply well and wise and who hold sacred masculine energy and medicine that can help us to come into right relationship with the earth, with each other. These wise grandfathers hold the memory of what it means to be children of the earth and to be protectors of life. So I honor these wise grandfathers of our lineages, welcoming them to the fire with us. And I'd also like to welcome the wise grandmothers, feeling these grandmothers step into our circle and stand side by side with the wise grandfathers, holding the matriarchal medicine of land and lineage, honoring these grandmothers as givers of life. And I really feel the power of the grandmothers and grandfathers here in our circle as we begin this conversation, as we begin to explore and remember what it means for the masculine and feminine to be in unity and harmony with each other. And so I honor all of these ancestors of our lineages, honoring my own grandmothers and grandfathers who stand with me and who walk with me. May we feel the medicine of the ancestors, opening our hearts to receive this energy of union and reconciliation between masculine and feminine, held by the wise grandmothers and grandfathers. Mila buihas, 1,000 thanks, Chan Chinshir, old ancestors. We honor you. We honor you. So, the title of this episode is Sacred Kingship, Initiation, and Healing the Division Between Men and Women. Before we officially dive in, I want to presence that Niall and I are both cisgender, heterosexual people, and we're going to be sharing from these perspectives during our conversation, especially when we talk about the relationship between men and women, the masculine and feminine. And I want to begin by sharing that I've been immersed in women's work and ancestral feminine teachings for many years. And those of you who listen to this podcast regularly will know that historically I've focused pretty exclusively on these themes in my conversations. And so this episode might surprise you a little. And because you've chosen to press play and listen, I trust that you have a curiosity about this topic. So I invite you to enter into this conversation with me and Niall in a heartfelt way, really following those threads of curiosity, and to really think about the important men in your life as you're listening, and also to feel that energy of healing and reconciliation that I feel is really being longed for in these times between men and women. Since last year, I began to have the deep realization and understanding that doing women's work and matriarchal lineage work feels incomplete without including the masculine, and working to repair the wound between men and women in both personal and ancestral ways. And this message came through really, really strongly while I was visiting the Isle of Wight last year, which is where my paternal lineage comes from. We have a long history on the island. And I felt the wise grandfathers show up in a very powerful way, wanting to be remembered. And they basically said to me, "Don't forget about us." And I felt this deep longing of the patriarchal lineage to receive healing and come back into wholeness. And I've had many experiences since then that have shown me just how much the patriarchal lineage longs for ancestral healing. And so I began to get curious about what it might mean to work with the wise grandfathers and the sacred masculine. And I'm still very much in that exploration, and I'm holding this with a lot of humility, understanding that I'm very new on this path. But what began to happen is that I started to make some beautiful connections with men in both Ireland and England who are doing men's work. And through these connections, I discovered Niall. One of the things that I really respect about Niall is that he talks about this bone-deep desire to be initiated by the sacred feminine. At least those are my words and my understanding. And in the women's work that I do, I'm acutely aware of the impacts of patriarchy in the lineage and within ourselves, right? And the ways that we as women have been severed from our matriarchal medicine. We've been separated from our mother and grandmother goddesses. We've been severed from our sacred connection to our bodies and the earth, the feminine wisdom of lineage and heritage, and so much more. And it's really important to acknowledge that men have been severed from these things too. And I really see the ways in which men have both benefited from and been deeply harmed by patriarchy as a system of control and domination. So Niall and I are going to explore these themes and topics more deeply in the spirit of repair and reconciliation, so that men and women can stand side by side against all predatory systems of oppression and domination. So, Niall, let's begin with a deeper introduction to you and your work in the world. How did you end up doing men's work, and what was the calling that you heard to follow this pathway?
Thank you. It's been a long journey, to be honest. When I was about 20 years old, I had a bit of a breakdown. I was living in Belfast and I was living up the road from my parents. And I had this breakdown that lasted about 3 months. And within that time, I experienced the world in a completely different way. And it culminated in me breaking down what I considered to be breaking down the English language. And I had the whole front room in my house covered in breaking down the English language and feeling like I had broken into some sort of mysteries or something had happened. And so that sent me on a trajectory of like, I really want to understand what life is. And because I had experienced something in those 3 months of just like a real opening, and I think people are starting to reframe what mental illness now is in more present terms, that, you know, sometimes whenever we have these breakdowns or whatever, but actually they're opening up into different levels of consciousness. So that started me on this journey of like, what is it to be a human? Because I had really experienced something in there that's a real sense of understanding of what life was, but that just went away after 3 months. You know, in a context, like you could say that I was having an episode of being high, you know, but I came back down to earth, and that kind of started me on this journey. And it was about 10 years later, I ended up leaving Ireland and I ended up living in England for almost a decade. And while I was over there, I was living in a community called Embercombe in Dartmoor, just in southwest of England. And a man had done this weekend and he came back and something had changed around him. And I asked him, like, what have you done? And he said, I've done this initiation with the Mankind Project. But the thing that really struck me about him was that he had just a whole different presence about him. And there was a level of like depth in him that I had never really witnessed before in a man. And I just noticed that self in me. It's like, I don't know what it is to be a man, actually. I don't know what that means to me. And I really want to go on this journey. And so I went and I did this initiation way back in 2014 with the Mankind Project in Forres in Scotland. And that just started me on this journey of like, well, what is it to be a man? And so as I started going on that journey of we were really working with the archetypes of the lover, warrior, the magician, and the king, I was noticing a big difference in my life. And I was also feeling more connected to being a man. And I was feeling more clear in my life and what I wanted to achieve and create. And then I started to notice that there was something similar to what you said in the introduction. I was like, if I'm not dealing with the feminine here, there's something missing in how I'm working on myself. There's something missing in me as a man. And I knew kind of deeply in myself that it was something that needed to be addressed in me. And I just knew that I hadn't fully worked through this mother wound. So that's kind of what started me on the last 10 years of working with masculinity. Now, also, just like in terms of like what was my calling with this work, my greatest calling is like, how do we fix what's going on in the world, you know? And I think for me, that even though I find this work difficult and I find it challenging in some ways, like working with men and working with my own kind of healing is hard, I also feel like it's a key piece in terms of how do we start to rebuild healthy society again? How do we start to rebuild the relationship and the sacred relationship that I would say between men and women? And so if we don't have healthy men in the world, we don't have women that feel safe. We don't have children that feel safe. We don't have a world that's safe. And in my own kind of journey in life, I realized that for me, it wasn't about becoming like a nicer person or becoming a healthier person in myself or like avoiding all these aspects of internalized misogyny or internalized like difficulty with women or difficulty with mother and kind of escaping out of that. It was actually about really going into those dark aspects of masculinity, going into those toxic masculinity and actually healing that part of me. And I think that that's what needs to be addressed in society, is that we're really working with masculinity. We're not trying to avoid it. We're not trying to get out of it, because we end up with an unsafe society. And I really see that in the world at the moment as well. It's like we need strong men who have done their healing around the masculine, who are able to stand up and protect women. Like I know that we have spoken about this before, this idea of moving from predator to protector. The predator being the shadow, the toxic, the patriarchal aspect of masculinity. Now we can ignore that and try and live in a happy or a joyful or a light way of being a man, but we lose our balls, we lose our sense of power. So what we're really doing here is moving towards like healing that shadow aspects of the masculine and helping him move into a healthy sense of who he is, where he becomes the protector, where he becomes like the man in the world actually needs. So yeah, that's kind of a convoluted way of saying that I feel that men's work is absolutely essential at the moment. And I feel that understanding and working out healthy masculinity is one of the first steps for healing society itself. If we don't have healthy men, we have unhealthy society. And I don't think anything can really fully heal. Even if we have healthy women, I don't think that a society or culture can be healthy until men are healthy. So that's why I'm here, is to really stand on that front line of like, how do I heal myself and how do I support men to heal as well? And, part of this conversation is like, how do we support each other as men and women? How do we understand the wounds of each other so that we can really begin to help each other, as opposed to be in this, they talk about the war of the sexes, so that we're really starting to come together as an allyship, So yeah, that's at least the beginning to your question.
Yes.
And it's complex. I just want exactly what you were saying at the beginning. This is kind of new. It's not that it's new to me, but it's very complex. And we're dealing with multi layers. And as you were saying at the beginning of this call, like bringing in the grandfathers, we're talking about ancestry here. We're talking about like a deep demonization of the feminine, a deep like separation from the matriarch, as you said, for men and women. So we're really, when we approach this subject, we're really talking about one of the biggest wounds that I see in the world at the moment.
Yes. Thank you so much, Niall. I feel really inspired by what you just shared. And, really reckoning with those shadow aspects of self. It is truly not easy work. And, I do this with women, but in different ways. And, there are ways we have been imprinted by systems of oppression, and we have to look at what we've become because of that.
Yeah.
And we have to look at our traumas and our shadow aspects of self. And we also have to look at the predator in us. Because, for me, I feel that the predator and the predatory energy is not just assigned to white men, let's say, right? It's like the predator doesn't have a gender, it doesn't have a race. This is something that can exist in all peoples. And we can honor that historically over the past hundreds of years and so on, and even thousands of years. Men have particularly colluded with the predator in terms of patriarchy, and white people have particularly colluded with the predator in terms of racism in the world over the past hundreds of years. So, it's important to look at all these different aspects of self, and these systems of oppression really interweave. And so this, this call to go in and do that deep healing and reckoning work is so powerful, and something that I feel we all need to be doing. So honoring you in this work.
Okay.
And, I love what you were sharing too about coming into that deep sense of what it is to be a man. And again, this is something I do with women. It's like, what does it mean to us to be women? And so again, it's something that we are both, working with because it's important. And I love that you talk about the archetype of the king and, that sovereignty piece that's about reclaiming our inner sovereignty. And that's obviously like the masculine expression. And I'd love for you to tell us a bit about the path of sacred kingship from an anti-colonial perspective, as someone who's attuned to the ongoing and ever-evolving decolonial movement that's happening in Ireland.
Thank you. So, God, these are big questions. So I think like in terms of like me living in Ireland and being on the land, like a part of when I really started to look at my healing, I also had to start looking at like how we've been impacted by colonization and looking into the stories of that. So looking at that kind of as a first point, especially in terms of men, because I work primarily with men at the moment. And we start to see that some of the major ways that we were impacted around colonization was, apart from the obvious things like we were separated from our music, we were separated from our culture, from our language, we were separated from the land itself. We were also like really shamed in terms of our identity as being Irish. And I still have these pictures in my mind of during the penal laws, how these pictures were depicted in the English press as Irish men being drunk, disorderly and barbarians, and that was very much part of the colonial strategy. And for me, living in England for many years, it's like I also felt that unconscious projection from English people. So it's kind of very much logged into the psyche of both Irish and English men, and working with the Mankind Project for years, we started to unearth, these unconscious wounds between Irish men and English men. So it's very much like part of our healing then is to really look at this shame piece and really start to see how colonization had a major impact on us. And also the other layer of that being the church, and very much in the church was really about shaming people for me, we really lost our sense of connection with who we are. Like shame is about attacking our identity, who we feel as individuals and who we feel as a culture. So the path of sacred kingship, like I think we're going to be going into this a little bit later, is a recognition that the way that men came to the point of full kingship was not by only working with men, but that a way he stepped into his kingship was by him being honored, being recognized, and being challenged by the feminine. And that a man needs to be faced with a woman or with a goddess or with the land before he can fully step into all that he is. So for a man, it's not only us like working with our masculine, working with our like shadow aspects or working with, all the masculine parts of us. It's that we only fully step into what it is to be a sacred man whenever we go through that work with the feminine, and she activates us into our heart. So for a man, then, the sense of feminine energy or the feminine pulse within our body is through our hearts. So we may have men in the world who are, able to earn money or be good protectors or able to, be present and act out like healthy masculine aspects of themselves. But until we actually get activated through the feminine, then we don't come into the wholeness of who we are. And this is what sacred kingship is. It's about really honoring and recognizing that a man needs to go through that feminine before he can fully go into himself. And the feminine being like all aspects of the feminine, which is primarily about a man becoming in connection with the land herself, so that he makes that movement into being in service to the land, stepping into that sense of being a protector, being in service, being a provider, and standing in service to the land, standing in something greater than himself. And for most of us, then we're maybe doing like the initial part of becoming healthy men, but we're not really stepping into the sense of what it is to be a sacred man. And that's something that I just became very interested in the last number of years, and recognizing that men need to address the feminine. Men need to be able to activate their hearts before they can come in to the wholeness of who we are. And that's when we become sacred. And so we're looking at like three aspects of masculinity: the unhealthy masculine, toxic masculine, the healthy masculine, whereas we start to look at the shadow aspects and we start to kind of integrate more aspects of ourselves, and then the sacred masculine, where we have fully integrated our own internal feminine, where we have fully integrated our own internal masculine, and where we stand on this realm of the earth, where we're connected to the sky, the consciousness of masculine above, and connected to earth, the consciousness of feminine below. So that's kind of the full spectrum of where we're wanting to go, but it's kind of multidimensional as well, because when we're looking at colonialism, we're dealing with deep shame, we're dealing with like separation from self, we're dealing with separation from the body, separation from sexuality, sensuality, so it's really, really multi-layered. It's like the path of sacred kingship for me is like, how do we go through these different aspects of healing? But ultimately, the main piece here is like not to only become healthy men, but how do we become sacred men, which is the integration of these two aspects of self.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm really feeling the power of what you just shared. And what I'm really feeling is that deep initiation that the sacred masculine must walk through, deeper and deeper layers of initiation, and the feminine being an important piece of that. And I want to address, because I know that many of the people listening are women, I want to address that, I've sometimes heard women in response to these kinds of conversations go, well, I feel like I'm in service to the masculine all the time. I don't want to initiate men. I don't want to be part of that. And while I hear that, and I really honor the sensitivity around that, I think it's important to name that there's an initiation of each other. So, we're talking about the masculine in this conversation primarily, but, at least this is what I've seen and experienced in my own life. And I honor the diversity of experiences. When I'm in relationship with my husband, who I feel is, in his healthy masculine, we're initiating each other. And so it's not like we women are just being of service to the masculine and we're not receiving in return, right? So there's an initiation of each other. And to be sacred men and sacred women, I feel that it's important for us to be in those deep initiations separately and together. in some way, right? And it doesn't always have to be through romantic relationship. I honor that, obviously not everyone is going to fall into this duality of man and woman and masculine, feminine. Like there's a spectrum, right? There's the duality of masculine and feminine. There's a whole spectrum in between. And obviously not everyone is heterosexual. And so there's going to be a lot of different kinds of expressions. So just leaving room for all of that nuance and all of those experiences. And I want to share some wisdom just going off of what Niall was sharing about the king being initiated by the feminine. So I want to share some ancestral wisdom from Ireland that feels really relevant to this. So in ancient Ireland, there was a very important ritual called the Benis Riha, the wedding feast of kingship, in which a woman would stand in the place of the sovereignty goddess, which is basically a goddess of the land. And this woman would stand in the place of the goddess as a bandri, a priestess, and give her blessing to the Irish kings. And so the king and the goddess were ceremonially married in this ancient rite. And this union served as a promise and sacred contract that the king would uphold his responsibilities to the land, the people, and the spirits of the other world. And these rites were so important that they actually lasted well into the Christian era, and Irish kings could not rule without the blessing of the sovereignty goddess, the goddess of the land, and the woman who stood in her place. And it's also really important to understand that the role of the king and the bandri, the priestess who stood in the place of the goddess, were considered equal but different. Equal but different. And this tradition actually lasted into the 1600s, basically until Henry VIII forcefully brought Ireland under the rule of the British Crown. And at the heart of this ancestral rite, the king is spiritually initiated by the woman who stands in the place of the goddess. And I would also say vice versa, right? There's an initiation of each other. And as a result of this initiation and this union, the king becomes a sacred protector and is bound to his sacred responsibilities to all of life. I mean, I just invite us to imagine for a moment what it would be like for our leadership to embody these qualities, right? Responsibility, protection, right? And that real sense of masculine and feminine holding these leadership roles with a deep sense of their responsibilities. So, Niall, you speak really beautifully about this longing for men to be initiated by the feminine, as you've just spoken about. And I actually feel that this is a deep and ancestral longing. And so I'd love for you to share more about this longing for initiation and what this means to you personally.
Coming back to my own relationship with my mother, she was very much able to provide me with food, all the necessities. And it was a few years ago that I was listening to a woman talk about this. Irish mothers were very good at providing, but actually there was a lot missing just in terms of like nurturing. I feel like I was missing a lot from what I needed, from my mother when I was young. And I think also in Irish culture, which has been spoken a lot about recently, is there were things that just were not spoken about. So there were things that happened in school, I was bullied and so on, that weren't really addressed very well, So arriving then into my 20s and so on, there was this sense of the feminine wasn't safe for me. And I knew from a very early age that I had shut down my own relationship to my own heart. Both my parents are very religious. My father ended up being a Methodist minister. And so for me, my association with love or my association with the feminine was that actually it was very scary. And I see this a lot with men and the Path of Sacred Kingship, which I'm hosting at the moment, which you're going to be part of as well, Tara, is we really come up to that level of a man spoken recently saying that he's petrified of the feminine. And I've already had a woman in the space really supporting men to be working with the feminine. So recognizing, and some women may recognize this part, is men have this real love-hate thing with women or love-fear thing with women. So we really want to be connected to women. We really want to be in that state of intimacy. We really want to be having healthy relationship. And also there's a fear, there's a shutdown, there's a sense of either anxious attachment or avoidant attachment. So there's this kind of confused sense of our relationship with women. And for me, I just knew that she was part of my healing that I needed to do. And was with another organization about 4 or 5 years ago called Celebration of Being. And I did what's called Nobleman, which was an initiation where 25 women initiated 19 men. And there was a point within that weekend, we sat down in a line and there were 25 women who danced for us and they were dressed in white. And there was that sense of devotion and recognition of the masculine. And afterwards, they then bathed our feet. And for me, I had never been treated that way as a man before because my relationship with my mom, I think she had real difficulties with her own father. So I don't feel that she had that respect towards men. And she certainly didn't have that respect towards my father. So I had never been seen or never embodied an experience where a man was celebrated, where a man was really recognized as being not only useful, but like revered. And for me, that was incredibly beautiful. And I also know that in my own personal relationship, the last relationship that I was in, just like recognizing what you were talking about, that sense of like women and men are initiated by each other and that we inspire each other. It's like that we're really inspiring each other into be more of ourselves, and coming back into more heterosexual situation. Like myself, I am heterosexual. So for me, then the truth of a woman's heart or the intimacy of who she is, she inspires me to be a better man. And through experiencing this over and over again, I started to see that I was stepping into more of myself and stepping into more of what I would call my healthy masculine frame as a consequence of being in this relationship. They talk about the idea of Shiva and Shakti, like dancing with each other, so that we inspire each other into more consciousness. And for a woman, she is inspiring a man into more of his consciousness. And for a man, he's supporting like a woman to feel more safe so that she can be connected to her sense of love and her sense of connection more. So I think that there's a very fundamental relationship between both men and women that we really can support each other. And like I've been inspired into my greatest growth through women, through doing these initiations with women and also through the path of sacred kingship as well. So there's a whole other level of initiation that happens with the feminine. So for men to think, I believe anyway, for men to think that we're going to like come into our full, healthy, integrated masculine on our own or just with other men, I think that we're being foolish. And I think that the missing piece here, the missing piece that I see in men's work is that we're not working with the feminine more, because this is part of coming back to the colonization piece. This is part of the colonization piece, is that we were taken away from our Celtic culture, which is very much like goddess orientated, very much about celebrating both the goddess and the gods, So unless we're really integrating that sense of spirituality into our lives, we're not going to move into the fullness of what it is to be a man. That's how I see it. The more I work with the feminine, the more I have been in relationship, the more I feel that sense of reverence and wanting to, support women, wanting to like, I feel like I'm less in my like wounded self or wounded little boy, and that I'm more able to like step into like healthy relationship. I'm not looking for approval from women. I'm not looking for women for intimacy or for sex, or I'm not looking to like, for her to say, oh, you're a good man or whatever like that. And that's all the wounded aspects of the inner child, which maybe a lot of women will experience in men. Whenever a man hasn't fully integrated his inner child, and whenever he hasn't gone through this like initiation, then he's still acting out that dynamic of little boy and mother, And I think that's where the frustration that you were talking about before is like, God, I feel like I'm always helping my man. It's because he hasn't stepped into his full masculine, he hasn't stepped into his healthiness. So he's still looking to mother. And that's very frustrating, I feel, for a woman. And I certainly see in my last relationship with my partner, like that dynamic was playing out. And me as a man, I'm like, I don't want to be like that. It's like, that's not how I want to show up in the world. But because we don't have this initiations where men find their own nourishment, men find their own connection with their hearts, then this kind of dynamic is still playing out. So it's really fundamental, I feel, for men to have to go through this initiation or to work around the feminine or the mother wound or whatever we want to talk about, but it's really fundamental. Like, I have made so much change in my life the last number of years when I started working with the feminine. Up until that point, I feel like I was still acting out a little boy, even though I was like connected to my king, warrior, magician, like feeling those archetypes in myself, unless they're actually knowing what they're in service to, which to me is about it being in service to life, being in service to the land, or being in service to women, then we're still in that kind of little boy dynamic. Whenever a man really steps into being in service to being on the land, to being protecting women, like why are we developing these aspects of self if we're not like really serving them towards life? That's when we become men. That's when we become sacred men. That's when we step into kingship.
Yes. There's so much to respond to there. That's so beautiful. It's so many layers. And I love that you began by talking about your own mother wound. And, the mother wound is something I talk about with women as well, because it's so impactful. And, one of the things I talk about is how the mother is actually one of the greatest perpetuators of patriarchy. And it's not to place all of the blame on mother, because it's a much bigger story than that. And of course, father has a role in perpetuating patriarchy too, and what have you. But this core wound between mother and child is really, really deep. And it makes me go, okay, well, why are mothers unable to show up fully to the role of mother, right? And that's fundamentally an issue with the way in which our colonial patriarchal society is set up currently. And so mother is under-resourced, and mother is under-supported by her husband, by community, and what have you. There's a lot of shame and silence that then gets passed down through the lineage, through both, sons and daughters and all genders, right? So again, this isn't about blaming mother, but really recognizing the ways in which there is intergenerational trauma and imprints through the lineage, as well as these external factors that put so much pressure on mother and put so much, there's so much transferred trauma through the lineage as a result of these systems of oppression that then gets passed down. And so I love what you were sharing about the little boy who is still on one level seeking validation and affirmation and love from mother. And this is so powerful. And I really, really see this in a lot of men today. I can see it so very clearly. And I know men who are in this state of consciousness, and I have compassion. And so I love what you're sharing about the need for initiation, right? Both within the masculine and also with the feminine, in order to heal that really core wound.
Yeah. And I think what I also saw in my last relationship was like she was also playing into the mother role as well, because whenever she wasn't in her full, like, whole self, then if I was acting from the little boy, then she would go into the mother role, and this is how we unconsciously then start to act out these roles, and we start to create the codependency. So in a situation then where she's able to hold that sense of like, I'm not your mother, do you know what I mean? Then I'm able to like step back into my wholeness, or whenever I'm like being in my wholeness, that whenever she's stepping into mother, I'm just going like, no, like you can't speak to me like this, so we're keeping ourselves healthy, so somebody needs to like be really stepping out of this. And I really like what you're saying around how mothers have an impact on patriarchy. I just noticed in myself there was a sense in me of like, oh, well, it's not mother's fault. It's because men haven't been initiated. So then women are in situations in a family where they're married to boys, and then they're not getting the support that they need. And then they end up creating a dynamic with their sons where the sons become the father, do you know? And this is what I hear in men's work a lot. So we start to see the complexity of this and how we're both to blame here, For me, a big piece around this is, let's not start blaming, it's your fault, or whatever. I think it's helpful to just to like start to break out the pieces here and go like, well, number one is initiation was fundamental as a pan-cultural thing that was done in all societies, where men need to release themselves from the mother. People knew this in indigenous cultures, and maybe just to go into this a little bit, which I'm sure you can speak more about this, but when a girl comes to the point of her menses, then she obviously starts to bleed, and there's a descent in the body. And I know that for you, then each month, then as you're going through the cycles, then you're descending into the body, and you're descending and connecting to earth. So A woman's body is naturally connected to earth. And for a man, we're not connected to earth naturally. And we're actually solar creatures, so we're more connected to sky. And so for a man then, whenever he doesn't go through this initiation, then he doesn't get to connect in with that feminine. He doesn't get to connect in with that nourishment. And so then what's acting out in the world then is this lack of nourishment. I need intimacy, I need mother, I need breast, I need nipple, I need, is that feeding? And then we also see the impact of that again of like extraction from the land, extraction from goddess, extraction from women, taking, So we really start to see that initiation being one of the fundamental ways that when colonization came along and removed that from society, men became dependent, and I know for myself, like battling with cigarettes, that they talk about this, like the metaphor of like sucking on the nipple as we're sucking on a cigarette. Men, like we lost our nourishment when we weren't going through these initiations, and you talked about how women are disconnected from the matriarchal line. And I see that men and women are both disconnected from that matriarchal line in different ways. But it's the same thing, it's the same sense of disconnection. So there's work on both sides here. And once we start to eke out, what are the shadow aspects that are playing out, then we can start to step out of these and step into adult and not perpetuate these again, because we just continue, once a mother is over mothering her son, then he ends up in a relationship that's not healthy. That has an impact on his partner. Then it perpetuates into the kids. Do you know what I mean? So we're continuing that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's so many cycles to reckon with and understand and break. And this is part of the initiation, is really being able to see into all of these unspoken and unseen patterns that are playing out, right? Within our family systems, within our relationships, and what have you.
Yeah.
And so this is the path of being initiated, is deeper and deeper layers of understanding. And, I feel that, again, initiation is important for both men and women. And I see a lot of women right now saying things like, I wish my man would do his inner work. I wish he would do the work. And I feel this, and I really understand the deep importance of this. And there's different layers here that I would love to explore with you. Because number one, I think, again, that sense of women saying like, man, I want you to step up, right? That's real. Okay. Yeah. That's real. I want you to stop being a little boy, and I want to stop being your mom. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that's valid and real. And we must remember that we women also need to go through our own initiations, and that, let's not extract from the masculine, asking him to do the work just so that we can be served in the ways that we want to be served. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so there's a shadow there that I want to call out. And I want to give credit to a really wonderful man called Ison, who brought this to my attention. So thank you, Ison. And I also want to talk about the stigma around men doing men's work, because I feel that there's this big movement around women doing women's work, which is so necessary and so needed. And the men's work is kind of lagging behind. And I think it's because of this stigma. So I'd love to hear your perspective, Niall, on the nature of this stigma or this block around men doing men's work.
Well, actually, I don't know about in Ireland at the moment, the last number of years, and in England as well, there's been a lot of men's work that's been set up. And for me, it's actually become quite fashionable in some ways. Now, what I would say is that there are different levels of that. There are many organizations out there who are doing different aspects of that. So I think it has become quite fashionable. And with anything then that kind of comes in vogue or whatever, there's like maybe not the substance that's needed. What I would say is, like, in terms of maybe in more mainstream roles and so on, I think for a man to do his work is quite scary. Like, if we go back into the ancestral, what we've taken on from our fathers, being brought up in a patriarchal society for many centuries, like, men have been trained to be killers, and to have compassion or to have empathy or to have any connection to our heart could literally cost him his life, or could cost the life of one of his friends, So we have been fundamentally trained as men. And I think that this has been inherited from our fathers, that we shouldn't have compassion, we shouldn't have empathy. We've been as part of the patriarchal society that we need to shut down the feminine. The other aspect of that is men have been trained from a very young age, and I know that there are different dynamics in different countries, to not be weak, don't cry, don't show tears. Big man, especially in Ireland, I really heard this a lot whenever I was younger. Be a big man, don't show emotion. Men also have been bullied. We've been slagged off. We've been called like pussies. We've been called, which in itself speaks to, the separation from the feminine when we're using like female genitalia to express this sense of somebody being weak or somebody not being, in their full power. So for many, many years, we've been programmed and conditioned not only by our own immediate families, but by schools, by, our ancestral inheritance, that we shouldn't be in touch with the feminine, that we shouldn't feel. So as adults, then we arrive into that situation. We have blocked down decades and decades of fear, decades and decades of pain, of hurt, and we do not know where to start. And most guys are really shut down at that point, either in a spinning out of addiction. Like as soon as we feel any sense of emotions, then we have an entire like conditioning set up to like bypass that, shut it down, either avoid it or go into rage, So it's such a monumental task. And because women have been conditioned to be more like emotionally aware, emotionally mature, then I feel like you can speak to this yourself, that you're able to like navigate your emotions better. But we've been conditioned to be separate from our emotions. So at some point then men just explode, because emotions are an incredibly powerful part of us, and we suppress them again and again and again and again. So for men, it's terrifying. It's really petrifying to actually have to face 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 years of suppression, 50 years of putting away. And a lot of men don't know where to start. And so it's easier for us then to be able to manage our emotions with addictions or with alcohol or whatever. And I think men are starting to move out of that now. And I think there are better organizations. But also just to speak a little bit around like therapy, talking therapy and so on doesn't really work for a lot of men. I have a lot of men who come to me going like, I've been in therapy for years, but it didn't really do anything, So we have different ways that we need to be working, and not just talking about our feelings and going around in circles. We really need to be like implementing different ways of working with ourselves. So I feel like that's also a factor as well. And definitely the men that I work with, they're excited to be in there. They're excited to be doing the work. They're excited to be like stepping into more of what it is to be a man. They're excited to be looking at their shadows, So I definitely feel that it's starting to change, and it's becoming essential now for men to be able to do this work and learn the tools to be able to, be healthier, deal with their shadows, deal with their reactions, and like, how do we move into like building a life that we are proud of? And in terms of like women like supporting men, it's like, I think we need to be inspired to do that work ourselves. And trying to force a man to do something, we get quite stubborn. I'm not really sure what that is. But also like sometimes, some of the ways that I was really catapulted on my own journey is like those clear challenges to men. It's like, if you don't do this thing, like we can't make our way through here. And for a man to hear that, that becomes like a bit of an ultimatum to him as well, So it's like, let's not mother men and really start to bring them to their own sense of accountability, So that requires healing on both sides. Men need to step up, start to do the work, and women need to start treating men as men and saying that like, none of this anymore, none of this bullshit anymore. I'm not putting up with this shit anymore. And really stepping into their wholeness as well and saying, okay, I don't need to mother you here. I just wonder about what that dynamic is where women unconsciously mother men, like what are women getting out of that,
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think that really firm boundary of saying to men, I'm not going to be your mother.
Yeah.
I think that is like, from what I've just heard you say, and I can feel the truth of it on our end, is like a very powerful statement and can really sort of propel the man into action, right? Because as soon as we stop going, actually, I'm not going to do this for you. I'm not going to mother you in these ways. The man starts going, well, why not? And like, it feels like something's wrong now, right? It's like the whole dynamic is thrown off.
Exactly.
And so it's like, to actually have a healthy relationship, that needs to be addressed.
I don't know if you relate to this, but I really noticed whenever I would go into my inner child and then she would go into the mother or her inner child, we were both locked in this dynamic, but it really changed me whenever we spoke about this. And I was like, it would just really help me if you just said to me in those moments when you're recognizing this has happened. And of course, I'm going to take responsibility around this as well. It's like, but I'm not your fucking mother, like put on your big boy pants and like move out of this. And that really helped me, whenever she kept calling this out to me, because if we haven't fully integrated our wounds, then our unconscious then is acting out. So as soon as she would go into mother or control, I would immediately go into little boy. These dynamics then play out, and if one person can really step out of that, then we can start to heal the relationship between us. But it's hard. These are sometimes wired into us for decades.
Yeah, really feeling the difficulty of these dynamics and holding so much compassion. And, there's no beautiful way to break these patterns, right? They're messy, they're complicated, they're painful. And ultimately, when we do this work, I feel that we're really addressing a lot of intergenerational baggage, right? Trauma, patterns, indoctrinated systems of supremacy and what have you. And I feel called to share an experience I had a few months ago where I was in ceremony and the grandfathers came, and I ended up sitting by a fire in the ceremony, and I closed my eyes and I could see the grandfathers, and I was seeing the fire of the patriarchal lineage, the fire of the wise grandfathers. The fire was so cold. There was really only like an ember left in the fire. And the message I just kept getting was, we're so cold, we're so cold, we're so numb, we can't feel. We're completely shut down, which is what you were sharing earlier too. And there was so much pain in how much the men of the lineage, the grandfathers, had to shut down to survive.
Yes.
And to, survive through colluding with predatory systems in many different ways, or being harmed by predatory systems. And so I was really feeling this, and I started crying, like really wailing for the grandfathers. And I started to blow on the fire and blow on the fire, and like with my prayer, and like, okay, it's time for the fire to be warm again. It's time for the grandfathers to feel again. And it's time for them to come back into their hearts. And so there was this whole beautiful experience where I basically rekindled the fire for the grandfathers. And I share this because I feel that it's deeply powerful, and I feel tears in my eyes as I'm sharing this. And I feel that this is happening on a personal level, right? It's both ancestral and it's personal. Sure. And so, that little boy who's like seeking the warmth of mother and the warmth of the earth and the embrace of the feminine, is looking for that warmth outside of himself. He's looking for that love outside of himself, that connection outside of himself. And what just is coming through from the grandfathers is like, may you find that connection within. May you tend your own fire and be the healing for the lineage of men going back through time by rekindling that fire. So yeah, just wanted to share that as it was really strongly coming through.
Yeah, beautiful. And, and I really relate to what you're talking about, just this sense of, the shutdownness. And I think that's where the pain comes in, coming back to what you were asking before. It's like, and I think a lot of men are in this situation that we're so disconnected from our own emotions being like the color of life or our way of connecting, So when we think about not being connected to our emotions or shutting down our emotions, our ability to be intimate is limited. Our ability to see the color of life is limited. We become quite gray. And so how I really was looking outside of my body to feel this experience, because I'm lacking so much of myself. And then the second part of that is just like, even when we do that healing, it's like, what I really long for in my heart is that I have these really healthy relationship where I'm really able to be in those dynamics, like a healthy dynamic with women, both my partner and just women in my life. So there's a deep longing in my own heart, and I'm suggesting it's probably bigger as well because men have been separated from women, of just really wanting to be in that healthy, sacred connection with women again. So we're both kind of grieving for this like lack of our own connection as we go on this healing journey, and also just like grieving the lack of like healthy relationship or dynamic, because I know a lot of men are struggling in relationship, and I know a lot of women are struggling in relationship as well. But we have this deeper sense enough like of instinct of like there's something beautiful here. It's just like we can't get over our wounds, you know. So there's a sadness around that. I feel it's like, oh my God, this could be so amazing, but you know, we haven't fully navigated our own personal wounds and then these ancestral wounds as well. And that's where the pain comes from. It's like a really deep longing when we speak between men and women. I just really feel it. And as you started this call, it's like we're really remembering this deep, deep knowing of the sacredness between men and women, and that actually we become so much more. We multiply our power and our ability. And so for me, it was part of that disempowerment of culture, disempowerment of individuals was to separate men and women. So as we start to do this healing work, we start to create power in our communities. We start to create power in our cultures. And we really start to emerge into other ways of healing the people around us. And I know people have talked about this before. It's like, I feel like the love that we're cultivating in our connection or in our relationship, that I wanted to feed the world, you know? And I really feel that like that's a really beautiful vision as well, that these relationships or these sacred connections can really start to have an impact on the world around us and culture around us.
Yes, this is such a beautiful note to end on. And it's truly, you're speaking so deeply as well to my longing for this healing between us. Because when we talk about the power of the people, you know, the power of the people overcoming the power of the few, we can't do that unless we stop fighting with each other, yes. Right? And men and women, you know, we fight, right? We fight in relationship, we fight collectively, and, you know, there is deep work to be done so that we can actually come into, as we've been talking about, our sacredness and be deeply initiated so that we can stand side by side as equals and, you know, really fight against these systems that are ultimately harming all of us to different levels, but ultimately harming all of us. So that's really my prayer in doing and beginning to do this work. And I'm so honored to be part of your container, Niall, for Sacred Kingship. And it's a really important step for me on this path. Yeah, really feeling the support of the wise grandfathers as I begin to venture into these realms. So yeah, thank you so much, Niall, for this beautiful, beautiful conversation. It's been really illuminating. And I would love for you to share where people can find you and the kinds of projects you're working on and anything else you'd like to share with those who are listening.
Sure, thank you. And yes, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like we've only just got started in some ways. It's such a big subject, but even to open it up a little bit, and I hope it inspires some of your audience as well to be thinking in a different way. And there's one thing I just want to finish around this subject. It's like one of the most beautiful things that I've heard recently in terms of romantic relationships is that the greatest way that we can love someone is to understand their wounds and make a concerted effort not to trigger the other person, you know? How do we really hold each other's wounds and really start to move towards an allyship with the other person and try and like in those moments when we're in conflict, it's like, you know, we're friends here, we're allies here. And even like just changing our attitude ever so slightly towards relationship or towards who we're relating to in that way, and just really stepping into that team allyship support of each other, because we've all been messed up by this, you know, and the more we start to come together, I think the better it is for everyone. So in terms of where you can see more of my work, I'm on Instagram at the moment. It's _Niall_Graham_. I do 3 months and 6 months containers for men, which is really about, just doing all that healing work. And the objective is to really come out like being a much healthier man by the end of it. And I also do ongoing trainings, different types of trainings around shadow, around sexuality. So I'm going to be doing a container next February on sexuality called The Sacred Cock, which is about really supporting men to come into a healthier relationship with our cocks, which I think is just a really big part for men. So that's going to be happening next February. And yeah, check me out on Instagram. And also, recently I have been working with men and women. We've been doing ceremonies about like healing the relationship between men and women. So I will definitely be doing more as we move forward, because yeah, as we've touched on in this call, every time men and women start to address this wound, things happen. It's just powerful. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Niall. Thank you so much. And yeah, I just want to briefly respond to the final thing you shared there around being sensitive and supportive of each other's wounds, and doing this in an empowered way that doesn't play into that dynamic we talked about of coddling and what have you. Yeah, I wanted to share, for women, it feels so supportive when men can deeply hold space for the ways that we've been harmed by the masculine, so when my husband, and I feel that he does this really beautifully, when he holds space for some of the deep wounds that I have with the predator, it's really supportive. Like, it makes my whole nervous system relax and go, okay, like there's nothing to be ashamed of, right? Because women hold a lot of shame for the ways that we've been harmed by the predator, which is, it's not an accurate, of course, feeling. Like, the shame doesn't actually belong to us. It's been placed upon us. But when we can have open conversations and be held by the masculine in those ways, and for there to be understanding, that is deeply, deeply supportive. And I'd love to just finish this time together by honoring the wise grandmothers and grandfathers, really honoring those ancestors that we called in at the beginning, and feeling the solidarity and reconciliation that is here. Deeply honoring the ancestors for holding this space for us. Míle buíochas, Sean sin sure. Thank you, old ancestors. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
And honoring all of you who are listening. Thank you so much for being in this conversation with us. There's so many complexities to this conversation, and regardless of what your identity and expression is, regardless of how you express gender and feel about gender, I hope that you've taken something away from this conversation. So thank you so very much, and sending so much love.
You've been listening to Dreaming the Ancestors with Tara Brading. My passion is connecting women to the wisdom of their ancestors, specializing in ancestral feminine wisdom from Ireland and England. If you feel called to connect with your Irish ancestry in an embodied, spiritual, feminine way, I lovingly invite you to sign up for my free reclamation journey, which includes a 90-minute video to connect with your Irish ancestry and ancient heritage. And if you hear the call to connect with your English ancestry, I have a 3-hour introductory workshop called Women of the Wells. You can find these offerings at tara-wild.com/get started. To spell that out, that's TARA-WILD.com/get started.